Thanks, everyone. Welcome to the newest installment of the Zillow Speaker Series. Ever since we launched the site 6 years ago, there has always been a gaming element to Zillow. The entertainment aspect, what the media has called real estate porn, has always been somewhere in the Zillow DNA. In fact, even our name, for those that don't know, Zillow is Zillions of Pillows, which is meant to capture the quantitative analytical aspect of real estate, but also the fun kind of home-related place where you lay your head down at night, kind of squishy aspect, more entertainment aspect. And that brand and fun has come through on Zillow blog and elsewhere in the product. But today we have an expert on gamification, on ways to design products to really tug at heartstrings and get people to actually re-engage with them through gamification and other enhancements to the product. I'm very excited to welcome Gabe Zichermann. You are very, very excited.
Winning.
All right.
Winning. Awesome.
All right, we're down one chair. Anyway, welcome to Zillow, Gabe Zichermann.
Thanks, everybody. Awesome. You know, for everybody who didn't see that beautifully timed chair collapse, I'm reminded of my first day in 7th grade, brand new school. Totally true story. First day in 7th grade, changed schools because I wanted to, and walk into class, and I'm a little bit late because I had to go to the principal's office to check in or something, and all eyes turned to me, and the teacher's like, "Oh, you must be the new student. You're Gabe. Hey, everybody, nice to meet you. Take a seat." And there's the integrated seat with the table that we used to have. And so I go and I sit down, and the thing just boom, crashes to the floor, opening salvo. So thank you for reminding me of that. Really good times. No, actually, that kind of stuff makes you a more certainly a heartier person. So I want to talk about the subject of gamification today, and actually we'll put this in, we got to put this discussion in context to really be able to make it work. It's a big, broad topic area. And I think the best way to put gamification into context is to think about it in the context of change. So I think every single one of us in this room, every one of you watching in other Zillow offices, no matter what it is that you do, no matter what your job title or job description or responsibility, change is a core part of your life. And in fact, the company itself seeks to make a significant change in the way real estate behavior is actually executed. So change is an omnipresent feature of our lives. And one of the core axioms that we think about in terms of change is that change is hard, right? And of course, President Obama knows a thing or two about how hard it is to make change in the world, today being a particularly interesting day for this topic. But the bottom line is, it's hard to change systems, big or small. But there's a real question about this, for me, this kind of long-held belief that change is hard. Is change really actually that hard? Take a look at this chart for a second. This is a chart of social networking service usage. And what it shows you fairly unequivocally is this. 7 years ago, not a single goddamn person in the world tweeted what they were eating, talked about every detail of their baby, showed you what was irritating them at that exact moment, posted photos of completely pointless things. That behavior did not exist 7 years ago at all. Today, 2/3 of the population does that behavior every 15 minutes. So is change hard, or is change easy? And the truth is, change is actually operating in two very distinct but parallel and important tracks at the same time. The first one is that collective change may appear exponential in nature, like the chart I just showed you. When we sum up all of our change, it might look like this. But when we drill down and look at each person's behavior and actions and life on an individual basis, change is mostly a perfectly linear process. If I decide that I want to lose 10 pounds, I don't get to turn to you and borrow 5 of the pounds that you lost this past year and say, hey, dude, I'm going to take those for my 5-pound weight loss. That's not how behavior change works. We make changes in a mostly linear way. Collectively, our change looks exponential. So it turns out, though, that if we want to get people to change, if we want to engage them in the process of changing their behavior, there are 3 things that seem to attract people to the process of personal change. And that is feedback, friends, and fun. Systems that contain these three things, feedback, friends, and fun in spades, are things that people are really, really attracted to. And not only are they attracted to at first, they're attracted to in the long term, in a repeated way, in a sort of recidivist way, that they can't seem to break out of. They love feedback, friends, and fun. Seems perfectly logical. And it's really the devil's in the details of these three things, because it's a fairly obvious statement, I guess, to make in general. It's gamification as a concept that I'll define for you in a little bit, that wraps up feedback, friends, and fun and all these other elements into a kind of overarching worldview or theory or thesis about how it is that we drive change. And it's part of the reason why people are so attracted to the concept. It turns out that the biological reason why games work and gamification works is deeply, deeply, deeply embedded in how humans are wired. It turns out that anytime you challenge yourself to anything in your life, anything at all, and you achieve that challenge, your brain secretes a little bit of a beautiful chemical called dopamine in response to that. So challenge, achievement, pleasure, right? Now, isn't that an interesting thing about the human brain? That challenge and achievement causes pleasure? When you start to think about that in a bigger context, it probably explains a lot of why we do all the crazy shit that we do as people, why we build these big buildings and climb mountains and like design new proteins and stuff like that. Because the core process of challenge and achievement produces pleasure for us. This is called intrinsic reinforcement. It happens in every aspect of your lives. Any kind of challenge and achievement may produce this. A career challenge and achievement, running a marathon, learning a new language, meeting a new person, getting married, whatever it is that you challenge yourself to and you achieve it, your brain will produce some dopamine. The difference between game systems and the real world is that while this challenge achievement loop happens hundreds of times per hour in a game context, how often does it happen in the world outside of games? What, like once a year? Once a lifetime? How many marathons are you running, right? So this process is really like highly optimized for the way that our brains work and explains a lot about why games are so popular. It's also true that as the process of games has exposed people to a new way of thinking about the world, there is increasingly a younger generation that thinks differently about the world and the way that it works. And many of you in this room are part of this highly game-influenced generation. Often we talk about the millennial generation as a particular way of thinking about it. But as you get younger and younger down the scale, games have greater and greater of an impact in the world. So I'm 38 years old. I'm part of the oldest group of people to have video games in the home, right? Atari 2600 was my first crack in the game space. And for people today, for young kids today, 5 or 6 year olds, for those of you who have kids at home, how intuitively do they pick up the iPad and start playing Angry Birds? What does this increased exposure to games actually do to their brains and their perception of the world? And I often think about what I had to do to play a game was this. One hand on a joystick, one hand on a button, right? But any of the contemporary games that you play, particularly super sophisticated multiplayer games like World of Warcraft, require at least 5, sometimes 6 simultaneous actions to be managed at the exact same time. Manage your character, short and long-term objectives, chat via text and voice with your peers and other people in your guild, deal with the interruptions of your parents. These are all the things that people have to be able to do in order to play these games. And so we come to this funny moment at which games are not only a product of our culture and a product of our desire for intrinsic reinforcement and challenge and achievement and all this positive feedback, but also are changing the way that our brains work and changing our expectations of the world around us. And I'm struck by that, I'm struck by this idea in some ways when people want to talk about, the younger generation and their perception of reward or achievement, and people talk about, this sort of ADDism of our culture, like constantly looking at your phone, constantly needing some positive reinforcement. And I think rather than thinking about folks as being kind of ADD or ADHD, rather it's probably true that the world that old people made is just too freaking slow. And I think that I think that this kind of semi-comical observation is increasingly being baked into the thought processes of product and experience designers. We're saying, well, maybe we can never go, like this device, the iPhone, which I'm holding up in my hand. We're never, ever, ever going to go back to a cell phone that doesn't have the internet and push notifications and games and, right? We're never going back to that Motorola StarTAC phone. So The world will not get slower from here, no matter how much old people want it to. It's only going to get more intense. And so it's incumbent upon you, agents of change, people who design experiences, who interact with customers, who are pushing the envelope of products, it's incumbent upon you to make the world a more engaging and faster moving place. So gamification is this concept, and let me just define it for you. Gamification is the process of using game thinking and game mechanics to engage audiences. And the important term on this slide is process. And that is, we never arrive at gamification station, ever, never, ever. Everything that we do with the techniques is about a process of continuous improvement. We keep making the experience better and more engaging over the long term. We start somewhere, but we always keep improving that experience. It's also important to define what gamification is not. And it's not just about throwing some crappy badges up on your shitty little website, okay? Now, for many of you who've come into contact with gamified systems, this is your principal experience of them. Badge, yay, badge. Okay, badges are important. Badges can be meaningful. Badges can be motivational. If you were in the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or the military, you certainly know how important badges are. If you own a luxury vehicle, it might not surprise you to know that that thing on the back of the car that tells people how expensive your car is called a badge. Badges are important and meaningful in the world, yeah? However, they're not the only thing that you need in order to make gamification work. They're part of the system. The second thing that gamification is it's not about turning everything into a game in the classic sense. This is the thing that people often get caught up on. And I'm telling you, seriously, guys, not a week goes by that I don't get a call, usually from some ridiculous marketer, saying to me like, oh my God, you know what? Angry Birds, so huge, so awesome. Let's make an Angry Birds for muffler repair. That's a true story. Let's make a draw something for ice cream. Also a true story. I get this seriously all the time. And when people think that the power of games lies in their visual manifestation, in the idea that what's fun to somebody about a game is the act of throwing a bird at an object that then falls on a pig, if that's what you think is interesting about games, then you misunderstand them. It is the mechanics of games that make them fun and compelling, not the theme of them. It's the underlying mechanics that matter. And so we care about that deeply. We also invoke sort of three different industries when we think about gamification. We borrow from game design, we borrow from loyalty program design, and we borrow from behavioral economics. And if you're in any way interested in applying these theories, our gamification process or tactics to whatever it is that you do, you'll find that the best asset you can have as an individual, certainly to support Zillow's strategies, is to be endlessly curious about human behavior. Because nothing in the canon of human behavior is a law. Everything is in progress. We're constantly learning about how people are motivated and what motivates them. And each one of these disciplines drive that forward. So being curious about that is an important asset. Now, I talked earlier about engaging users, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I want you guys to be thinking about what we mean when we say the word engagement. Because the word engagement is not a throwaway word like buzz. Buzz is a throwaway word. Engagement is not a throwaway word. It means something. And typically when we think about engagement, we think about being able to measure it. And it's incredibly important that we measure it. And we measure usually 5 core metrics: recency, frequency, duration, virality, and ratings. And you understand, I think, most of these, and any of you involved in the analytics of your business will immediately recognize these. I just want to highlight 2 of them that are a little bit different. Virality is the measurement of how many people are brought into your process or product by other people who are using it. It's sometimes also called K, measured as the letter K. Virality is an incredibly important measure of health of your system and should be baked in everything you do. And ratings, it's incredibly important to be asking your customers and users what they actually think of your product, and it is a measure of engagement of your product. So these 5 metrics, recency, frequency, duration, virality, and ratings, they're not the only metrics, but they're core metrics, and the balance among them can give you kind of a sense of what engagement actually means. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about me, and then I'll give you some fun examples of gamification, some ideas, get you thinking, get you excited. So I'm Gabe Zichermann. I come from this place, which is Toronto, for those of you who don't recognize it. That is not the Space Needle. I spent a lot of time in this place, which is San Francisco, now more recognizable. And now I live in this place, which is New York, and I continue to love photos of cities across bodies of water at dusk, as you can tell. My favorite type of picture. I spend a lot of time in this place thinking about how it is that we make the world more fun and engaging, which is a really cool part of what I do. I've written 2 books, and I have 2 more coming out in the next year on the subject of gamification, and I edit the main blog on the topic at gamification.co. I run these 2 companies, the Gamification Corporation and Dopamine, which is my strategic consultancy. At Dopamine, we built some cool stuff like this real-time infographics engine at Social Media Week, if any of you went to that, was super fun. Or this cool product we built for Gamification Summit called Meme Cube, which is like a highly optimized, ranked leaderboard challenge-oriented Twitter client that's optimized for conferences that we built, which was pretty awesome. And you could sort of like see what people were saying in very, very real time and compete for challenges and finish missions during the course of a conference. It was super fun. I help companies big and small engage in gamification, and this is a conference that I run called G Summit that just ended. If you're interested in this topic, the slides are up online, and the videos will be up online shortly from the conference, and you can dig into some of the topics that are most interesting to you. All right, so I want to talk about some examples of gamification, some of them really exciting, and some of them kind of seemingly boring, get you thinking a little bit about how this might apply to what it is that you do, share some patterns for design, have some time for questions, okay? So here's one example of gamification that many of you might be familiar with. This is the progress bar from United's Mileage Plus website. It shows you your progress to the next point of engagement on their kind of status ranking system. Now, it's an important melding of game mechanics, things you might have seen in video games, these progress bars, status bars that you've probably seen. You also may be familiar with the one on LinkedIn, melded with a loyalty program. Now, the interesting part about this particular status bar in the old design, this is the old design of it, was that you could actually complete the status bar in its entirety. You could get to totally finished. In the new design of it, you can't get to the end ever, because there's always another level, there's always another thing for you to do. That's an important unpacking of one core game concept, right? So there's always another challenge for you to complete. This is a site called Top Guest, which melds sort of traditional online and offline loyalty and gamification together, bridging the gap between the two, giving you benefits and stuff for checking in. And it's important to kind of think about how we connect these 2 particular worlds. The loyalty world is very big. Rewarding people for constant behavior is a very, very big market. And it's also possible to take that and make that more social and fun. And probably the biggest example of gamification, the most common one that people think about, especially as it relates to loyalty, customer loyalty, and engagement, is Foursquare, which is a system for doing that kind of in a layer over top of the real world. But there's a lot more examples that touch on the question of customer loyalty and engagement using gamification that are a little bit different from all of these. So let's talk about some of those. So this is one of my favorites. This is from the automotive business. And if you guys have owned a hybrid or battery electric vehicle, which since we're in Seattle, at least some of you must have one, hybrid or battery electric car over the last few years, you will have noticed the encroachment of games into your dashboard. And it started with the Toyota Prius, which gave people a kind of running performance summary, right? You've been in a Prius, you've seen this kind of bar chart that shows you how your MPG is faring over a period of time, kind of rolling like a side-scrolling game would be. And I observed this in the kind of Toyota Prius, and Toyota did as well, that people started gaming it using that view. So it's like the most common display view in the Prius, and it shows you your last like hour and 15 minutes how you've been driving. And people would just like run that and be like, okay, I'm gonna beat my MPG, I'm gonna beat my MPG, right? My next move. And really fascinatingly, other people sort of picked up on this concept, right? So we had Honda incorporate this idea. And then Ford took it up a notch. You can see the Ford Fusion there on the lower right. The Ford Fusion or Focus hybrid electric car has a little green plant that grows on the right side of the dashboard. And the more ecologically you drive, the lusher and greener the plant is. And the worse you drive, it withers and dies. Pretty cool. It is what we call a Tamagotchi or virtual pet game, right? It needs constant care and feeding. You got to drive ecologically, feed the plant grows, it's healthy. You don't, it dies. Virtual pets, awesome. And really, really cool when you think about it because it doesn't really interfere with driving, which is one of the more compelling things. And then the Nissan Leaf, the battery electric car, has a Facebook-connected social game in the dashboard that allows you to compare and compete with your friends on eco-driving skills, like actually in real time. Now, what's particularly interesting about the automotive industry's investment here is that these designs, just these 4 things up on the board, this is over $100 million worth of product design and development. It costs a lot of money to build real-time games and retool dashboards and put them in cars and make sure they work every time. This is really expensive. But it's confounding because these customers, the people driving these cars, already bought the product. And not only did they buy the product before they got the game, they're not likely to buy another product for 5 to 7 years. So why would you spend this kind of money on somebody who's already bought your product? Now, there's a few obvious things that might jump out at you right away. Great PR, right? Getting a ton of it. I'm talking about it. Media's talked about it a lot. Really good for PR. Also, it engages the passenger in an experience that otherwise the passenger is kind of disengaged from. But the core reason is this. How does your car tell you, since you spent a big premium on it, you spent $15,000 to $20,000 more than a regular car, how does your car tell you what an awesome person you are every single day? How does it put its arms around you and hug you and say, thank you for helping the environment, you're such a good person? This is how. Every single day, your car reaches out and gives you a big old hug. It gives you feedback constantly on how well you're doing. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I got approached by one of the big auto manufacturers for to have a kind of strategic consulting discussion. I was like, cool, let's see what you have to say. And so they were like, all right, we're doing a whole bunch of research on cars, and we're thinking about the car of the future, and we're really, really gravely concerned. And I said, why? And they said, because teenagers today are competing to not drive when they're with their friends because they can't tweet or Facebook or do a second action while they're driving. So it's now become the standard that teens don't want to drive even though they have their car, which is fascinating because when I was a kid, it was not like that at all. It was all about being the driver, not being the driver. And now it's about not being the driver. And so they're like, we have to find some way to make the car more engaging for teens. And I was like, cool, we might finally reduce car usage in this roundabout. Like Twitter will be responsible for the end of the car, which I think is sort of fun. Another kind of cool example that you guys might have seen is CNN's iReport. And if you're familiar with the CNN iReport process, it's individuals, anybody can take a video, write a story, do an audio story, submit it to CNN. It gets uploaded to their website, and it's carried as a kind of news story in their iReport section. In the last 3.5 years, 750,000 people have filed news reports for CNN, completely and totally for free. They have absolutely positively reimagined the cost structure of news gathering for CNN. Now, that doesn't, obviously, most of the stories that you see in CNN are not iReport. But what's interesting about it is that all of those people filing those news reports, those millions of news reports that those 750,000 people have filed, they do not for money. CNN doesn't even come up with some bull way of trying to compensate you, like, I'll give you 10 cents every time 1,000 people watch your video online. They didn't do any of that. They just said, the thing you're playing for is that we will promote your story to the homepage of CNN if it's good enough. That's the game on the iReport. Fascinating, right? And if any of you used Flickr when it was still important, you might remember that there was a time when Flickr promoted certain people's photos to the homepage of the site, and then when that happened, you got a little badge sort of that dropped on your photo that said this is a promoted homepage photo. This was a photo of the day, Flickr, right? And how people were really engaged with that topic and what that did. So this idea that you can you play for status is important, and keep that in mind. Another example of how gamification is changing things, and this is something that folks don't often think about, is on the employee-facing side. About half of all the investment in gamification is going towards employees and partners, not just customers. And so I'm not going to reference how Zillow does this because I don't know for myself. But many people have worked at a company where the annual review process is hopelessly and terribly broken. Typically, it goes something like this. Your manager, once a year, because he or she is required to, descends from their mountain cave and begrudgingly gives you a written review, which was rubber stamped by HR, that gives you your standard annual review, standard annual raise, and then they quickly scurry back under the rock from whence they came, only not to talk to you for another year. Now, some people think that this process is not good. So they reimagined it using gamification as the core concept. Ripple and Duprops are two examples of companies that have done this. The basic idea is you can reward instantly your peers, your superiors, and your subordinates using your mobile phone for good deeds, instantly. Boom, Thanks so much for getting the coffee on that. Thank you for your help with that amazing pitch. Thanks for getting those TPS reports into me on Monday, right? And you do that instantly, and you give people virtual rewards and virtual coins and bragging rights and status on a leaderboard and information to the company about how and what people are doing at all times, instead of doing something like the broken annual report or a constant series of spiffs and competitions that result in endless monthly, like, who's at the top of the leaderboard getting their $100 Amazon gift card this month, right? The process is more dynamic and more engaging and uses all of these core ideas. Another one that, that's really interesting is this site called Codecademy. And the founders, based in New York, the founders are a triple bottom line startup. So they have a kind of social mission as well as a business mission. And their core concept is that learning how to write software code is an essential 21st century skill and everyone should learn it. But they were perplexed by the fact that even though every software application is fully documented completely for free online, meaning you can get every resource for every software language online for free at any time you want it, nobody seems to want to learn how to write software, and STEM, like software output in the United States, continues to decline. So the founders were like, well, maybe there's a better way of doing this. And so they turned the process of learning how to write software into a game. But interestingly, they did it for both the people taking the courses and also the people creating the courses. So both the teachers and the students play a game to learn how to write code. And in 12 months, 1 million people have learned how to write software using Codecademy, which is more than our total software engineering graduation in the United States, just to put that into perspective. So it's this process of creating engagement, thinking about both sides of the equation, is producing better results. And for those of you who are software engineers, you're very familiar with this site called Stack Overflow. And you've probably been on SO already today, and if not, I guarantee you'll be there tomorrow. Stack Overflow is the Quora or Q&A website for hardcore software developers. And the amazing thing about Stack Overflow, the thing that you can't ignore when you go on there, the world's top software developers, people who make hundreds of dollars an hour and will not talk to you unless you're building the coolest project in the whole entire world, go on SO and solve other people's software problems completely for free. Spend hours and hours rewriting and compiling code and running it to find problems and help other people solve their problems. Totally and completely for free. Like, why would you do that? If someone will pay you $500 an hour to write software for it, why would you ever do this? What a ridiculous thing to do. Solve other people's technical problems for free. Well, not exactly for free. Stack Overflow's economy is based on this virtual currency called creds, which is a virtual currency that means exactly what it sounds like. It's a measure of your credibility. And the 1 million or so people who use Stack Overflow on a regular basis vie to have the greatest amount of credibility in their particular market space. It is a classic sort of pissing contest or bragging rights designed experience, and incredibly powerful. The founder of Stack Overflow, Jeff Atwood, gave a talk at G Summit that should be interesting to any of you who are working with, let's say, more independently minded communities, which probably will resonate for you at Zillow. Many of your customers are not used to following orders, and they're kind of more independently oriented, and they need a more driven structure in order to move forward. So let's talk about some design patterns briefly, and then we'll have some time for questions. So one of the core things that makes gamification so compelling is this concept called progression to mastery. And there are theorists who believe that this is what makes all games interesting. And the core concept is fairly straightforward. Everybody wants to master complexity in their lives, whether that's your finances, your relationships, your career. We're all seeking to master the world around us, to be as good at the world as we possibly can. The trick to building great gamification is to understand the underlying desire of the customer or player. What is it that they're trying to master in their lives? Not what you're trying to do as a company. What are they trying to do personally? And then build a system that if they follow the system from A to B to C to D to E, they achieve the mastery they were looking for. Seems straightforward, pretty hard to do in practice, but seems pretty straightforward. But the benefits of doing this as an organization, as a company, as a brand, are very, very significant. And let me show you by example through the experience of Weight Watchers. So you guys are all familiar with Weight Watchers. You can use Alcoholics Anonymous as a proxy. They're very similar in concept. They both are highly gamified systems. They really are very similar. They both are highly gamified systems in the classic sense. They have a sort of point system. They've got badges. They have challenges. They have achievements. Okay? But what really makes them interesting is their progression to mastery. Let me give you a scenario. So you're out on the street, you run into someone you haven't seen in 5 years, and you say to them, "Oh my God, you look amazing. You've lost so much weight. How'd you do it?" And they turn to you and they say, "Weight Watchers." What they don't say is diet and exercise, which is what they actually did to lose the weight. Weight Watchers is not a magical weight fairy. You still need to adhere to a program that basically reduces your caloric intake. You are dieting in Weight Watchers. But that's not what the person thinks happened. That's not what they say, right? And if any of you attended an Ivy League school or know people who went to Ivy League schools, you will have seen this exact same pattern before. People, when they give themselves to a system and the system delivers on its promise of mastery, they replace their sense of self-achievement with the system. They ascribe success to the system. It's the system that let me lose weight. It's the system that let me quit drinking. Not me. The system. That's how we're wired. And it's incredibly important to know how meaningful this progression to mastery process is. So if we take the other half of it, and let's say you're kind of rude or something, and you run into that same person 5 years later, and you're like, "Oh, you gained back the weight." Right? Which of course you never say, but let's say you did. That same person would turn to you and say, "Oh yeah, you know what? I got to get back to Weight Watchers." Not Weight Watchers didn't work, because it delivered on its promise of mastery. And we can do that for every single customer, every single player, every user of our product. They all are seeking mastery through your product and process. There's no question in the Zillow context that mastery plays an incredibly important role in every aspect of your customer's interaction with Zillow. You are the pathway by which they're accomplishing that. It's an incredibly important piece of it. Now, in game design, in gamification design, we also think about two other patterns. And the first one is that when we think about what actually is engaging or interesting to people, one size doesn't fit all. So we use a set of rubrics to think about how customers are different based on their motivation. And we care a lot about motivation in gamified design. We care less about demographics, and we care a lot about motivation. Because if I know what motivates you, I can pretty much figure out what you'll find fun and engaging. And so this is just one division of the world in terms of motivational state. This is by a guy named Richard Bartle, who's a game designer and researcher who did a bunch of work on MMOs in the 1990s. And he identified 4 different kinds of players: killers, achievers, explorers, and socializers. He divided the world into these 4. This is not the only one. This just happens to be the most common pattern. And it's an interesting sort of design. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but it's an interesting sort of thing. And before I describe it, I just want to say to all of you, remember that you're not only one of these 4 things. Everybody, all of your customers, has a little bit of all of them. It's just the dominant type that matters. So just as a quick example, achievers, and this is the one that usually gets high growth companies like yours, where you get caught a little bit, is on the achiever orientation. So when we design for achievers, the one core thing that we know is that achievers like to win. But there's a really inherent problem with designing for achievers, right? Which is not everybody can win. If I send you guys all out, for example, on a little scavenger hunt right now, I say, "Okay, everyone, great, here's a little challenge, go find me 5 things," and you all go run off and you put all of your investment into it, and you go find it and you come back, and I'm like, "Oh my God, you guys are all winners, yay." The achievers in the room will say, "Fuck you, Gabe." Right? Won't you? Because I stole an authentic win from you as an achiever by doing that. You intended to win, and I took it. It wasn't enough that you could win. You had to win authentically. That wasn't sufficient. It's an important dynamic to understand. And the second piece of the achiever that's a real challenge for companies, typically companies like yours, is that in this milieu, in the environment of high growth companies, especially startups, there's a lot of achievers. And if, as I've been talking about gamification, you've been thinking in your mind, yes, points, challenges, winning, leaderboards, prizes, winning, winning. You may be Charlie Sheen. You may also be an achiever. And it's important to remember that the majority of the population are not achievers. The majority of the population are socializers. They find fun in social interactions with other people. That's what they're looking for. And even in environments that are classically high in achievement, like stock market environments, we still nonetheless find a strong social drive. No company has ever failed by being too authentically social, just as a kind of benchmark for that. And so anyway, quickly, explorers are people who like to find things in the world. So their whole experience, what makes it fun for them is the discovery process, not the thing itself. And killers are like a special kind of achiever that are not, it's not sufficient for them to win. It's I got to win and you got to lose. Right? And I want as many of you as possible to see me kick Spencer's ass. The more people see that, the happier I am if I'm a killer, yeah? And so killers are a special kind of person. Designing for them is more challenging and complicated. It's not very straightforward. Are you guys thinking about which one of you is a killer right now in the room? I'm sure. Anyway, you can read a lot more about this and other kind of player typologies, both on my website and other places. And I encourage you to do so as you start thinking about how you design for your experience. And lastly, I want to share with you a key insight from gamification. We'll do some questions, which is about rewards. And this is an a priori list of rewards that consumers want. Status, access, power, and stuff. In order of stickiest to least sticky, and most engaging to least engaging. Also, conveniently for you, cheapest to most expensive. This list often turns heads a little bit for people. You know, it feels pretty rational, right? People like status, they like access, which is getting things that they couldn't otherwise get on their own for money. And they like power, they like being able to control what other people do. But don't people also like stuff? They do, right? They like money, they like free things, they like discounts, they like coupons. They really do. People like them. But do they drive exceptional engagement? Do they drive engagement? Do gift cards drive engagement? Do discounts drive engagement? Or are they something like a slippery slope? What is it about the slippery slope of stuff that's so complicated and that we want to unpack with gamification? It's very simple. That free things, discounts, coupons, things in the stuff category are important and meaningful to consumers, but they don't scale well. Just like any other kind of incentive or reward system that's based on cash type rewards, they get priced in very fast. If I tell you that every time you click on this thing, I'm going to give you $1 or a point or a mile, very soon you're like, okay, well, that's just the price. I'm not going to behave exceptionally anymore. I get that every time. Now you're going to need to give me 2 points. Oh, now you're going to need to give me 4 points, right? And that just continues to accelerate. But status, access, and power can be designed in such a way to scale. And they speak to a core kind of emotional part of people. And this is maybe the best distillation for you of gamification. People are not rational in the classic sense. It is the mistake that makes all of economics so annoying. Like when economists are like, the market's going to go up, and then they're wrong. And then they're like, the market's going to go down, and then they're wrong. Because they're always wrong. They can never be right. Because they make a fundamental mistake in core economics, which is they believe people act rationally. But in fact, the evidence says they never act rationally. Never, ever, never. They only act emotionally. And then they rationalize that thing after they act emotionally. So the key thing, and this is one of the core realizations that has come to folks that use gamification really well, is that by using some of these techniques and some of these ideas and some of the examples that I've shown you, which hopefully have been motivational, you talk to that emotional core of people. You serve them with status, access, and power instead of trying to constantly bait them with cash and stuff. That you design things that allow them to achieve mastery, that allow them to be the best possible version of themselves. And that drives them over the long term because that's intrinsically motivating. Because challenge and achievement are intrinsically motivating. And they're driven forward by that idea. It's a kind of emotional design, thinking about people in an emotional sense and designing for that particular user, which is every user, okay? So, all right, so I want us to think about all these things. I hope that this has been inspiring or interesting to you in some way, this is the start of our friendship, okay, everyone? Not the end of it, the start of it. My Twitter handle's up on the board, it's @Zichermann. I love, love, love crazy, crazy gamification questions. Like, can we gamify undertaking? Or like, how do we make cancer more fun, okay? I love stuff like that. So if you have like a crazy thing that you want to talk about or you just want to ask questions about it, I'm happy to help you and point you in the right direction for resources as a kind of ongoing dialogue about this. And hopefully, it makes you think a little bit about some of the things that you do in different ways and designing for emotion. So now I want to, we have a few minutes for questions, I guess, if anybody has questions about it. Or challenges, because you think this is crazy. Yeah.
Gabe, great presentation.
Gracias.
In the Bartles chart, you were talking about achievers and how they grow when they achieve something. It makes them feel good. The dopamine goes up, yada, yada. Do you see a behavior in a group where you have packed an organization with overachievers? None comes to mind immediately, except perhaps this group. Does the group collectively then achieve more, or do you see fallout from those who were used to achieving before they got into an extremely competitive environment, now are disappointed because they haven't maintained that top 5% or 10% position that they're used to? Well, what's the social dynamic there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really common problem when you when an organization is overly focused on achievement overall, because not everybody can win. And so what you find is highly functional environments that do that, whether you're doing it with consumers or you're doing it with employees, you need to find multiple tracks to drive that achievement with folks. Not everyone can be on the same track. Not everyone can be CEO of the company. If that was how you measured your success individually, if everybody measured themselves by the benchmark of being CEO of the company, there'd be a lot of sad and disappointed people, right? So you have to come up with multiple pathways for people to achieve. And so I posed a design challenge without giving you any design answers. But one of the answers is, when you have an environment that's highly achievement oriented, you want to create many different pathways for achievement. You want to start forking the design so that people can go down this path or that path or this path or that path. And even if sometimes those different pathways are not radically different from each other, so even if they're slightly different from each other, a good example of that might be just putting it in real estate. You put it in a real estate agent context. So when we show a leaderboard of real estate agents for top selling real estate agents or top selling salespeople, the old model, for those of you who remember video games or pinball machines in arcades, the old model for a leaderboard was the top 10 list. And you'd walk up to that machine and it would say, these are the top 10 players right now. And you would just be like, right? I can never get on this list. Most people would look at that as really demotivational. The top guy's got 150 million points. I've never played this game before. I'm never going to get on this list. So an achiever looks for a different game when they see that, because that game is not one at which they're likely to win. A killer thinks, how can I fuck these people up? An achiever thinks, I'm going to look for a different game, yeah? Right? So what we've done, for example, to modulate that in kind of more contemporary gamified design is we no longer show top 10 leaderboards as the default view for any game. Now we show you a relativistic leaderboard that puts you in the middle of the leaderboard, no matter where you are in the world. That's how the leaderboard shows up. Boom, you're in the middle. Here's the people above you and the people below you. The only time when we don't do that is when you actually are in the top 10 or top 20, and then we show you in that group, right? But so what we're doing is tweaking how the perception of the particular challenge might be. Or when we have a lot of players in some experience, we start dividing it by other characteristics. So instead of showing you just a generic leaderboard with you in the middle, we show you the leaderboard for people at your level of achievement in your geography. And then allow you to compare yourself in that group, which now gives you a different pond. We drew a different line around the world and said, oh, you have more potential to achieve in that environment because I made the pond smaller or different, yeah? So we do things like that in order to make that more palatable to achievers. And this has become very much a new standard for the way to design. It's interesting, though, organizations are coming to this later than, of course, game design, but that's part of what's exciting about this gamification thing. So the question was, in the case of the challenge achievement dopamine loop, are there situations where people are so removed from achievement that they don't believe it's possible to feel that way anymore, and other people who are so hooked on it that they're constantly coming back to it to try to like get more and get more and get more? And the answer is, of course, yes, for both of those categories. There absolutely are people in both of those categories. And the key thing, so this is the optimist in me. Now, we don't have a ton of data that will tell you the answer to this particular question either way. I think everybody can be moved off of that incredibly cynical perch. I believe they can. You just have to find the right way to kind of nudge them off that, ledge. Yeah, so the core concept is that everybody is status seeking. Fundamentally, humans are all status seeking animals, and there's lots of really fun research about the power and effect of status on people. One little funny side note is that people of higher status are healthier, significantly healthier. There's like lots of really interesting research on this. So the president of the United States, even though his job is perceived as very high stress, actually will show lower stress chemicals in his blood than you or me, as a result of his higher status in the organization. I mean, it's crazy, but true. So there's a lot of benefits to status, and so we are hardwired to seek it, and there's like, there's anytime you give someone an opportunity to take status, even if they're pretty cynical, they'll probably move to take it, because you really want it. It's a little bit like sugar or fat, like you're wired to do it. Really, really interesting primate studies on this particular topic, how hardwired it is for people. So the question is really one of kind of saturation or pushback when you've got a lot of social games are probably the best example of this. You get a lot of people asking you on Farmville or CowClicker or Cityville or whatever to do something, and eventually you're like, rah! Like, stop asking me to do this. Okay, so here's the thing. All, like I described before, all systems of engagement get priced in. And then if the reaction to the priced in framework is to turn the volume up on the thing that got priced in the first place, people will start to reject it and resent it, okay? So it's a little bit like, I'll take the counter example for you, and so you can see how it's different. So loyalty programs. Most of you in the room, I'm sure, belong to a loyalty program. The average American belongs to 8 of them, like a airline program or hotel program or, you know, Best Buy Reward Zone, whatever it is that you might be part of. So the average person has 8 of them. You might say to yourself, you know what, that Hilton program, who cares? Like, I'm never going to get anything out of that at all. Like, I get to stay in one Hilton a year, bleh, you know, like, I'll be 100 before I earn enough points to get that free trip to the Maldives that I was hoping for, blah, 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 right? But your reaction to it is not actively hateful. You've just concluded that this particular program isn't that rewarding and not that motivational. But you're not, like, angry with it. Now, if Hilton's response to your lack of engagement was to start phone calling you every day, like, hey, you haven't come to a Hilton in a while. I noticed you haven't used your points. What do you think about that? Let's do something. Okay, that's the analog to what's happened in social media with those games. Many of them have just turned, like the volume's been turned up and up and up on the kind of notifications and so on. And so it's crossed the line from being something that you're just like, who cares, to something that you're actively irritated about. And so the trick is when you're designing experiences like this, you don't want to cross that line. But that's the case for anything. I can make anything irritating to you. Even something delicious I can make irritating, right? Usually by forcing you to do it, that's the fastest way to make something irritating. And just as a small aside on that, one of my favorite things is all this gamification in the workplace. So a lot of companies come to me or examples of doing it, and they're like, yeah, we're going to make this awesome game that we want all of our employees to play. And then I'm like, cool. And then I'm like, how are you going to implement it? And they're like, well, we're just going to force them to play it. And I'm like, well, that's going to work well, because nothing is more fun than a game you're forced to play all the time, right? So just as a sort of analog to that, to think about as well, we also want to raise the bar for opt-in here. Everything that we design, we want people to want to do it. And that's another kind of like, that's another sort of challenge to the system a little bit, to say everything should meet the bar of people craving it and wanting it. If there was an Apple design lesson, that would be probably the top one. Do we have time for another question? Is there any other questions? Okay, great. Listen, I'm serious about this. Keep in touch if you guys want to talk about this some more. I really, really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you. Thank you.